Okay, it's 2 o'clock at least here in the Netherlands. So I would like to welcome you all to this GLO monthly virtual seminar with Damian Clarke. He's going to present a paper on family dynamics and crime in an age of fertility decline. I would like to ask you to please, if you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask the question. I think this works best when checking the chat. Yeah, so Damian, the floor is yours. Well, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Bill. Yes, I guess I should say, please feel free to shout out this paper. It doesn't quite yet exist in a working paper. We're putting in a big push now, so really all comments and suggestions are very much welcome. Thank you all very much for coming. I know it's hard to fit things in every day. So this paper, written with three excellent colleagues from the University of Chile, Juan Díaz, Jorge Rivera, and Josefina, who's actually originally a master's student and has done incredible work on this project. So I'm thrilled to present it here. The paper it starts from the a point long recognized in criminology and sociology, and also presumably upon induction, if we look at our own lives potentially, that parenthood is a key turning point. There's this literature on on turning points, and these turning points are infrequent, and they really reshape the way that we behave and the way that we aspire to be as humans. It came out of this idea from the life course literature particularly in criminology in the early 90s. This very influential book by Sampson and Loeb, noting that when you become a parent, it changes the way that you interact with people. It changes how you want to be. It changes the types of people you interact with. And really, what these criminologists note is that becoming a parent really should sharply decline, should sharply affect various outcomes, including the likelihood of criminal behavior. And a lot of this stuff is like ethnographic research from, say, inner cities in United States with quite particular groups of people, but the notion of parenthood being a turning point is something far more general. And so what we want to do in this paper is we want to look at parenthood as a turning point, in particular thinking about how it maps into crime. Of course, apart from the obvious reasons we might think that parenthood changes you potentially become a role model, you potentially start to interact with different people, you potentially start to have much higher costs of certain types of behavior. We know that also parenthood changes many other things. It increases economic demands, it increases stresses, it increases stresses on both finances and times. And now there's some more recent very high quality causal administrative or evidence from administrative data suggesting that we do see declines in crime rates in motherhood. And this is it just goes back to this point raised in these old books that we're seeing evidence of parenthood being a turning point, looking at criminal outcomes. Still, arguably, there's quite limited evidence on this. I think the lead paper here is this Masson-Crov and Rose piece from 2024, and they state that while this connection between family formation and crime has received a lot of qualitative literature, a lot of qualitative study, books particularly, the quantitative evidence is sparse, and there's two key precedents of which we're going to think about in our paper. The Masson-Crov and Rose work looks at administrative data for Washington State in the US, particularly showing declines in crimes among mothers and fathers, or declines in arrests at least. And then this other more recent paper by Brito et al. Looking at around half of the Brazilian population, and they find increases among fathers in reporting. And so what we're going to do in this paper is we have data on all individuals in Chile and the broad scope of the criminal justice system. So we're going to see people as they move through the criminal justice system. So consider a person who say, commits a crime. They're going to enter the criminal justice system when a criminal report is made, and then they're going to interact with the system in various ways. The report may be just archived, never taken forward, or a crime may be charged, the person may be tried, the person may be sent to prison. So we're going to really see people as they interact with the criminal justice system, um, and we're going to be able to match people with the time they give birth. So we're going to see sort of this transition. People become parents, and we're going to be able to map whether that affects both their criminal behavior and also potentially the way which they interact or the criminal justice system interacts with them. So I think
David,
on one
can
hand,
I
this
can I ask a clarifying question on
please,
the
of course,
previous
yeah, sure.
literature? So I just want to kind of know how I'm supposed to think about it. So for the mothers, the decline, is it mostly just incapacitation, or what are the
Yeah.
channels? Or
So I think
have they
really,
looked at
and
those?
we're gonna, I'll show you some evidence to this soon, but really, we think it's more a change in, like a permanent change in preferences. And I think there's various reasons why you might think this happens. I mean, there's a clear incapacitation channel, right? Like, of
Mhm.
course, the same way in, say, in general labor markets, um, around the time of childbirth, you have many other things to do. And so there's incapacitation, but you really see quite permanent changes in criminal behavior. And there's certain things you can look at, like say an incapacitation channel might exist in the second birth, right? And there's sort of a change in beliefs at the first birth, right? So we're going to sort of show that it's more than an incapacitation channel. Really, it's much more sort of a change in preferences and maybe like a warm glow sort of thing. You want to become a better person.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a
And
lot.
so I also had a question about indeed the literature, because now you talk about crime, but does it depend on the type of crime? Maybe, like I
It
can
decli
imagine if,
it de
yeah.
depends a lot on the type of crime. And actually, we're going to dig in. Like, I think a nice thing about this data in particular is we have a lot of information on the type of crime. And what we're going to show is that this isn't just a change in the likelihood of committing crime, but really a change in the way in which people commit, the types of crimes which people commit. And um, I mean, I'll actually show you some descriptive plots quite soon where we sort of see some quite specific crime types, which previously almost didn't exist, and now they do. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of sort of quite rich evidence here.
It's Damian,
Um,
I just have a quick question.
yeah, please, funny.
So this is like mostly urban crime or rural crime, or is it we are talking about only in the main, like San Diego, I mean, like the capital or whatever, or where is it?
So it's the entirety of the country. I guess a relevant statistic is that the country is I mean it's a mix of urban and rural. Around 30% or 25% of the population is in the capital Santiago.
Okay.
But we're gonna see all people. We see essentially we see the universe of people. We start from there, um, and then we can look at crime types where crime is potentially geographically varying, but it's everything.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thanks. Um, Okay, so we're gonna I'll talk about our data soon, but we think it's quite unprecedented in terms of both temporal coverage, so we see people for a long time, and in terms of richness in being able to capture both changes in crime, but also more broadly how this maps across the criminal justice system. We can also, and I'll talk about this soon. We can link within families, so we can link mums and dads and see whether there's any idea of families sort of specializing, potentially one in criminal behavior, one in non-criminal behavior. Um, and then there's some ongoing work, which time permitting, I'll show a bit today, and it's thinking about these missed turning points. And this is particularly thinking about the very large changes in fertility, which we're seeing across the world at the moment. Chile is an emblematic case of this. Fertility has declined substantially. And if, as the sort of the early qualitative and now more recent quantitative literature suggests, parenthood is a turning point and is like a substantial break on criminal behavior, as fertility declines sharply, this would suggest that we should see quite sudden changes in contemporaneous criminal behavior, and we're going to sort of quantify this and look at how we can potentially estimate these causal effects. All right, so I guess actually now this sort of gets to some of these questions, particularly maybe your question, Viola. What this looks like. So this is just a descriptive plot, no causal evidence here yet. But I think the nature of the descriptive plot is quite interesting. So this is if we take all people who become mothers at some point in our data, and our data covers around a decade, all people in Chile. And we center this on the moment which the person gives birth, right? So here in this plot, for example, this is criminal reporting. So this is the first time the criminal justice system is alerted this person has committed a crime, does not doesn't necessarily imply guilt, but they've been reported for a crime. And what you see is that 8 trimesters before birth, 7, 6, 5, 4, you sort of see this upward profile in criminal behavior if we just look at totals. And then you see this sharp decline from around 3 trimesters before birth, right? So about the time when people fall pregnant. We see this decline hitting its lowest point at the time of birth, and then you see this return, right? We could sort of naively with our eyes project forward, and you might think that, okay, this looks like a permanent decline, right? It's more than just an incapacitation effect, but we can discuss this. But so what we see is you see this decline, you see it quite clearly in reporting, and then in prosecution, which of course you can be prosecuted conditional on being reported. And then again in conviction. So for mothers at least, we sort of descriptively see this quite clear decline happening around 3 trimesters before birth. Generally, if you sort of break down by crime type, it looks like this is more or less everywhere, with the exception of this one sort of dark red cover, which is domestic violence. At least in these first two, in reports and prosecutions, you sort of see just looking at raw trends that there's sort of a lot happening. On the
And
other hand, if we look at
these are any births, not just the first?
sorry, these are all first births. I'll show you later on first births and
Okay.
second births. These are just first births. And actually, what we're going to have to do is going to have to spend quite a lot of time because I'll show you soon. These increases in crime leading up to childbirth are just the nature of criminal behavior. Both criminal behavior and fertility move together quite a lot, given age profiles, right? Sort of crime peaks when people are in their early adulthood. Also, fertility peaks when people are in their early adulthood. So there's going to be place for thinking about formal identification here.
And you have complete fertility data in the Chilean data?
Yeah, we start from the universe of all people, like from the census, essentially, and
Well,
then we
but like
match it to
in the
all
US, you only have information on children living in the household. So like by the time the woman gets to be about 35, it starts diverging, right? Because
No. So it's administrative data, so it comes from birth certificates,
okay.
matched to the registry of
Yeah,
national
yeah.
identity numbers. Yeah,
Okay, great.
yeah. Thanks. Okay, so for fathers, we see a somewhat different picture. If you just look at raw trends, ignore all the colors for now, maybe it looks like things are sort of flat with this little blip, right? Say reporting, you see there's like a decline, but then things look more or less flat. Similarly, prosecution, somewhat similar. Convictions, it looks like there's a sort of a permanent shift. And really, then if you drill down and look by type, you can see that there's sort of this change in frequency, or a decline in nearly all types of crime, descriptively at least, with the exception of domestic violence, which just skyrockets, right? And this sort of, as you can sort of see as crimes move through the criminal justice system, these pictures change quite a lot. So this, in some sense, just a prelude, just to sort of fix ideas in our mind about what we're thinking about, and we're going to nail down some of these parameters causally as we go through the paper. Then just briefly, I think the broader relevance of this sort of looping back to this point we mentioned previously about declines in fertility is in many countries there's sort of a concern about what the changes in demographic patterns imply. Across the industrialized world, we're seeing these declines in fertility. Chile, in some sense, is the perfect laboratory for studying these declines in fertility, because the decline in fertility has been very quick and very sharp. So even over the last 15 years, births have fallen from around 2 per woman, so at approximately the replacement rate, and now in 2024 they're at 1.04. So it's been a very rapid collapse in the fertility rate over a period of about 10 years. And this broader pattern is the broader pattern we see is people having births later and they're having fewer births. Typically, when one reads the literature, thinking about what are the concerns when fertility falls, it's sort of thinking about the long-term impacts, the fiscal burdens, changes in care structure and so forth. But our paper potentially points to another concern, that if fertility is a turning point and it's offering people a way to sort of get their life on the straight and narrow, these missed turning points might actually be quite serious in the immediate term. All right, so let me talk through the data a little bit. So what we've got is we have a Minister of Data, and I think the quite unique thing about our Minister of Data is that we start with the civil registry, and the civil registry in Chile is essentially, you could think of it like it's a national identity number. So think of it like a national tax number, which everybody has. In the country, it's say like 99.99% of people have this number, because without this number, you essentially can't do anything. So when you're born, the first thing your parents or someone in your household does is they register you, and they get you this national identity number. So we have essentially the universe of people living in Chile between 2011 and 2019. The only exception of people who won't have one of these numbers in the civil registry are illegal immigrants. Even say an immigrant, as soon as you arrive to the country, you're assigned a national number, and this number, it's really used for everything. It's used, for example, to open a bank account, but it's also used if you go to the hospital. It's used if you go to the supermarket and want to, I don't know, for example, collect points for purchase. Basically, everything you need this number. So we can say with some certainty, essentially the universe of people living in the country, with the exception of illegal immigrants, which is quite a small number. And then we're going to subset to births occurring between 2011 and 2019. So we observe all births. We observe information on their mums and their dads. And the dads are, I mean, if one thinks of, say, like US birth certificates or other places, you might think the number of dads on the certificates isn't that high. In Chile, the number of dads on the certificates is very high. They're essentially only not on the certificate if they don't recognize parenthood. So it's something like 90+% of the certificates have information of dads, and 99+% have information on the mums. So our starting point is we have all 2,130,461 births occurring between 2011 and 2019, and then we match these with information on crime records from the public prosecutor's office. So the public prosecutor, they're informed of all crimes in the country, and then the public prosecutor is the person who decides, is this crime worthy of investigation? So public prosecutor receives all criminal complaints from the police, determines whether the crime should be prosecuted, and then is the person who presents the case to judges, which then decide whether a conviction is rendered or not. So we match all births to criminal convictions of both the mums and the dads. Of course, the children are too young to have their own criminal convictions, so we match crimes to parents. We also, and I'm not going to focus on this much in today's talk, but we also have all formal salaries of the mums and dads around birth. These are monthly salaries. The reason we don't focus on these too much now is these are salaries in the formal private labor market. So a lot of the informal labor markets we just don't observe. So today we're going to mainly focus on births matched to crimes.
So Damian, one quick question.
Yeah.
So as far as when you talked about that, giving them an ID number, it's like what we have like a social security number in the US.
Yeah.
But the question I have is, what about, are these births, could they be out of wedlock, or they have to be?
Yeah, around actually like 70% of births in Chile are out of wedlock. So marriage rates are declining quite sharply. So typically, let's say the average birth is out of wedlock, and typically you would see both mums and dads, or you would basically always see mums and dads on the birth certificates.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean the only time you wouldn't be on the certificate is if you don't recognize their like parenthood. Yeah, so essentially, like you basically, children are born, they're registered with the civil registry within 1 month, and they're linked to both the mum and the dad for all sorts of reasons, for benefits purposes, for work purposes, and we have a very high portion of matches to mums and dads.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I guess maybe it's worth noting here what we don't observe. So what we observe here are all crimes linked to mums and dads. So we're not going to see if a person becomes a mother or a father and commits crime, but becomes better at committing crime and is not isn't caught, of course, or isn't reported, of course, we're not going to see that. We're essentially going to see all the crimes that are linked to a person. So if either a criminal complaint is made, but they're not sure who committed the crime, of course, we don't observe that. Similarly, if a person commits a crime which is let's say a success, which isn't ever reported, of course, we would also not see that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build essentially what you sort of saw in this descriptive plot previously. We're going to build a dynamic panel surrounding all first births. So consider a first birth occurring to this fictitious example here, child whose ID number is 1234. Let's imagine that that child was born in Q4 of 2010. What we're going to see then for all periods preceding and following their birth, we're going to see we're gonna build this panel where we see a number of outcomes, right? So we can see, for example, in one period before birth, did the mother commit a crime? Did the father commit a crime? Did the mother, I don't know, commit larceny? Did the father commit larceny? And we're gonna have this panel. We're gonna have this panel for 8 trimesters pre-birth at least, and we're gonna have it for 56 trimesters post-birth. So we're gonna follow these children over a substantial period of time. We actually could work with greater granularity. We could work at the level of month. We work at the level of trimester just because even working at the level of trimester, the number of observations increases quite a lot. So these 2 million births, which we focus on when you sort of expand to the pseudo panel, we have quite a large number of observations. And trimesters already, I think, offers a fair view of what's going on. So one sort of issue and why I think this paper, why we actually need to do some econometrics, why the graph I showed you previously isn't enough, is the profile of crime and the profile of fertility is very similar. So this in our data is looking at mothers and fathers. So here we're not focusing at all about on the age when they give birth. But what you see is that crime increases a lot. So here we're just looking at reporting of crimes whichever fathers commit. Increases a lot when men are young, right? So between 14 to 18, you see crime increase a lot, and then it starts to decline for many reasons, right? People I don't know have alternative sources of income. Some people get incarcerated. But you see this sort of this clear peak in criminal behavior happening quite early in life. You see that for dads and for moms. You see that for reports and prosecutions. We also see it for convictions. If you look at parents' ages, this overlaps quite a lot, right? So we see, this is just the histogram of the age that people in Chile give birth in our study period. Many people are giving birth at around the same time when criminal behavior peaks. So clearly, we're going to have to sort of think quite carefully about how we arrive at causal estimates of parenthood on crime. And actually, well, this is just the same thing we saw previously. If we center on birth, we know we've sort of seen these sharp patterns previously. That centering on birth, we see these declines in criminal behavior for reporting, prosecution, convictions. This is just the same plot I showed you previously, but now looking at totals rather than looking at crimes by type. Okay, so what are we going to do in this paper? We have to be quite careful in trying to figure out how we get at a causal effect. We don't directly compare parents to non-parents. We think the groups are different enough that this isn't the ideal empirical strategy. We could, but at the moment we're not. So what we're doing is we're going to do an event study where we use the timing of birth as our key event, and our control group are a particular type of not yet treated individuals. So this is parents who become parents later, and the sort of the key variation which we're going to use to generate identification is that some people have a birth at 24, some people have a birth at 25, some people have a birth at 26. Of course, that still requires considerable care. In particular, and I think maybe it's useful to break this down as sort of the identification, the thought experiment. Let's imagine a parent, aged 30 in 2015, who gives birth in 2015. We can consider how their outcomes vary between 2014 and 2016, right? So think of like a pre-post comparison. Now consider a future parent, also aged 30 in 2015, but who gives birth in 2017, right? Who gives birth at the age of 32. And we see how did their outcome vary between 2014 and 2016. And then we simply use B as a counterfactual for A in a difference in differences design. The reason why we think this is a good identification strategy is it fixes ages, right? So we account for this very clear age profile in criminal behavior. Right? We're essentially saying, imagine, say, this person, this 18-year-old who's at the most highly criminal part of their life. We're going to capture the general decline in crime occurring over age by using not yet parents. And we're gonna get the treatment effect by comparing the not yet parents who are aged 18 but have a birth a bit later to the people who have the birth at the age of 18. Of course, underlying all this is a parallel trends assumption, and it's that we can infer counterfactual trends for 2015 parents from 2017 parents. So the types of sort of things we'd have to be concerned about is that people who give birth slightly later, so say someone who has a birth at the age of 32 instead of 30, has to be on parallel trends in criminal outcomes to the person who gives birth earlier. So it's not even necessarily a concern if they're on different levels. Like, of course, we might think people who give birth a bit later might have different criminal behaviors. The point is that we want to infer the counterfactual trends for these parents from people who give birth slightly later. And we'll show you sort of we'll show you parallel pre-trends. We'll discuss this more when we show you the results. And then in terms of actually how we implement this, we do the sort of a quite standard thing. We use Callaway and Santana's estimate, which lets us calculate for each specific group giving birth at some time period, some trimester G, looking from some time period T, we're going to calculate an average treatment effect, and then the key parameter we're going to be showing you is an event study where we look. So let's say our ATT G, so the people giving birth in trimester G, so trimester 4 of 2010, looking from 4 trimesters post birth or looking from 3 trimesters pre-birth. We're gonna fix this all at the sort of the relative time period, and we're gonna report these estimated parameters from Callaway Santana to give you an event study analog, essentially just giving you a series of identified parameters, time relative to childbirth, if our parallel trend assumption is reasonable. Right, so one key thing, particularly if you look at this, is we have this event happening at time 0, which is childbirth, but clearly there's going to be some anticipation for this, right? We're not going to say that we think that what was happening one period pre-birth it gives us a good comparison point. So we're going to fix our comparison, our baseline emitted reference period at period T-4, so the trimester before conception, and then we're gonna see how things evolve from there. Okay, so what does this look like for mothers? What we see, and this is just sort of quantifying, I guess, what we already saw descriptively. Looking at criminal reporting, we estimate declines. Relevant quantity here is that pre-birth, the number of crimes per 1,000 women is 5.84, and we see moving from trimester -4 to even trimester, so this is trimester of birth, -1, -2, -3. You see this quite sharp decline where crimes fall nearly by half in the second trimester of pregnancy, or let's say first, second, third trimester around, and they fall nearly by like 90% in the trimester of birth, right? So we see this quite sharp decline in criminal reporting against mothers. We see a recovery, but we certainly don't see that this recovery, and this is up to 4 years post-birth. We certainly don't see any recovery in criminal reporting up to 4 years, up to the age of 4 of their child. Note also that the effect, if we average these coefficients compared to the mean, is we see a 28% percent decline in criminal reporting, right? So we see a large decline in criminal reporting. Considering prosecution, the pattern's very similar, but the magnitude of the effect is larger, right? So we're moving from a 28% decline to a 36% decline. So mothers are 36% less likely to be prosecuted for a crime. Moving to convictions, the effect again increases, right? So now we're seeing that mothers are around 50% less likely to be convicted. So this suggests various things. I mean, clearly it suggests that this turning point narrative makes sense, at least if we believe our identification arguments.
What can I ask, what's the average spacing between kids for Chilean mothers?
Yeah, like between 2 and 3 years.
So they're potentially having more kids here. So how
Exactly. Yes.
much?
Yep. I mean, so actually, what we could do, what we haven't done, is I could show you these results for mothers who only have one child. So I think the other relevant sort of contextual detail is that the norm in Chile is very much you have one or two children. Having three children is very, very uncommon. So we could estimate these for people with just one child.
Yeah.
And
Because
also,
at this point, I don't know how much of it is the permanency of the first child effect versus having more, right? So that would allow you to
that's a nice
silence.
point. Yeah, that's a nice point. We'll do
Yeah.
that. We haven't done that, but we'll do that. That's a very nice point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I'll show you in a little bit is I'll show you the second child effect, where we can condition on there having been like a significant time between the first and the second, so like at least 4 years or 5 years. But yeah, that's a good point. We'll do
Yeah, I
that.
think I'm more concerned about them being close and this just kind of continuing the
Yeah, I see. Like an incapacitation times 2, incapacitation times 3. Yeah, that's a nice point. Thanks. Yeah, so I think anyway, so the point well taken, and here I think the one pattern we want to keep in mind is we see this essential doubling, which could be various things, right? I mean, the fact that convictions declines by much more than reporting could be behavior of the criminal justice system. It could be that the judges somehow know, and they know it's more costly to send a mother to prison than a similarly aged non-mother. It could also be a story of composition of crimes, right? That the convictions declines by much more than reporting because many of the reports are for crimes that are just unlikely to be prosecuted. For fathers, okay, yeah. For fathers, you see quite a different story. Firstly, we see some sort of like slight failure of pre-trends. At least in reporting and prosecution, convictions looks essentially perfect. And we're going to see shortly why that is. Secondly, we see a much more sort of short-lived incapacitation effect, and if anything, we see a slight increase in crimes in the first years post-birth. Again, we're going to see shortly why that is, and it entirely owes to a particular type of crime. Again, though, we see this gradient that average criminal reports decline by 7% following childbirth. Prosecution declines by 8%, convictions declines by 20%. So we see this quite clear gradient. At least in convictions, we don't see any evidence of recovery in criminal behavior.
So, Damian, one quick question, if you have 5 minutes. So, in Chile, they don't have a jury system, right? If any of these things, it's the judge who decides.
The judge decides. Yeah.
So, how much lag is there between reporting on an average prosecution conviction? Because in the U.S., I mean, as you know, it's like a perennial thing.
Yeah, sorry, I should say all of these values are centered on the date the crime enters. So they're all centered on the reporting. So when I show you convictions at 0, this refers to convictions for crimes reported at time 0.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I get the point. We've run models where we look at the precise date of the conviction, but then sort of the issue. Well, I guess one thing is the gap wasn't as large as we thought. The time between reporting, prosecution, and conviction, it's not like over a year. The gaps aren't huge, and in many cases they're quite quick. But of course, when we focus on the time when the conviction occurs, there's going to be some messiness. So I don't know, a conviction in say period 1. For many cases, that's going to be a crime that was committed before birth, so it gets a bit messier. So yeah, in these results, we're focusing on the moment of reporting.
Oh, okay.
But
Thank
yeah,
you.
we can put the results out, actually. It's probably useful to show results with precise times of event. Thanks. Okay, so and even I think we've sort of seen descriptively, a key result is consider instrumental crime. So here we're taking like the categories that the public prosecutor's office in Chile assigns to crime. There's actually like 600 different categories, but they're assigned into 13 sort of larger categories: theft, nonviolent theft, larceny, other property, sexual offenses, homicide, etc. So we've somewhat we somewhat roughly classified these as instrumental crimes which could conceivably be viewed as having some economic benefit, versus expressive crimes, which is sort of like, I don't know, heat of the moment crimes, where it's much less likely you could think that these are crimes which offer economic benefits. I mean, one sort of key point is we see declines in these instrumental crimes across the board. So it's clearly not, at least from others, a case that you have more mouths to feed, so somehow you have to increase your labor supply, and we see people increasing crimes because they need to earn more money. We don't see any evidence of that. What we do see is that these declines occur everywhere, with the exception of domestic violence, right? Domestic violence goes through the roof. You see this small decline, and then this is reports against mothers, right? So this is saying, mothers are more likely to have been these are this is reports. Mothers are more likely to have been reported for domestic violence. If we look at fathers, the story is even more extreme, right? So fathers, you see again no evidence of an increase in these instrumental crimes, right? Especially among the more prevalent classes, like larceny, drugs, crime. You see permanent declines. What you see, like where you clearly see increases, is in domestic violence. Here, unlike mothers, you see increase in domestic violence even happening from the moment of pregnancy. Everything else declines. The other sort of increase here you see is sexual offenses, things like rapes, which are often reported around the time of pregnancy. The other thing to note, although it's a bit hard to see in this graph, is you can sort of see why we see some of these unexpected pre-trends. That domestic violence in particular increases in the run-up to childbirth, and part of this is just a contact point that many people in the years leading up to childbirth, they start to live together, and so you see this sort of increase in domestic violence happening, so period -8, -7, -6, -5, and you sort of see that this sort of explains an increasing trend, and then that keeps increasing here. Other crimes fall away, and then after birth, you just see this massive increase in complaints for domestic violence, which starts to become more stable.
And sorry, can you distinguish between like single mothers and or you don't know whether they live together or not?
We don't know. I mean, we know if they're married, so I mean, marriage rates are quite low in Chile in general, but we could run, for example, looking at people who are married. What we don't know, which would be really nice, is cohabitation.
Mm.
Yeah.
I was also wondering how much of it is just, when you don't have kids and the partner slaps you, you don't report it. But when you have a child, now you feel like, you also need to protect them and you report them. That part of this, might be just the higher incidence of the woman wanting to make that official.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's various things in there. One is also that this domestic violence isn't necessarily intimate partner violence. It could also be violence against children. So if you don't previously have a child, mechanically there's some
Yeah.
new type of crime that can now exist. And actually, I mean, we have these like the 603 or something, or 600 and some number of like precise crime classifications. So we can certainly drill down and say, like, I don't know, what's domestic violence for, say, an attempted murder versus domestic violence, which is I don't know, like yeah, just something like a slap. This we can look into.
Yeah, and I wonder if this would show up, like how this would differ with the second child, because that you would still have that mechanics of having one extra child against which it could be, but I would expect there to be perhaps less.
Yep, yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, of course.
So in the data, people may start cohabitation because the woman is pregnant. So the two events may occur at the same time. So just living with for the man living with a woman may affect his behavior.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, there's of course like domestic violence increases in like in distance, right? Like if you're living with a person and you spend much more time with them, domestic
Yeah.
violence increases. I think this is like one of the sort of key messages from COVID is that people get locked down together, domestic violence goes through the roof. Um, I agree. I think here, like in some sense, especially in intimate partner violence, it's very hard to separate childbirth from cohabitation. It would be great if we had a measure of cohabitation, and we don't. I mean, there are other things where we clearly know the victim's not related to the person, where we see these declines. But I agree that like domestic violence in particular, it's not clear whether or I mean, I think both of these stories are true. That there's
But this probably like uh, young men in their early 20s who are single, who socialize with other young men in their 20s. I mean, this is sort of the wild period where they're not fully mature. So, so a girlfriend or a wife, whatever, may have a calming effect on in outside the home, but inside the home, of course,
yeah. I think the best we can do is we can compare married to non-married. Getting cohabitation is just very, very difficult. Like to have this measure is very hard. But we can at least look at marriage and married and non-married.
So in terms of tax returns, do people who cohabitate not file a joint tax return even when they're not married, or you have to be
I mean,
married?
yeah, you have to be married or have like we could look at say like people who are married and have a like a de facto partnership. Again, that doesn't necessarily imply that they're living together or the people who don't have that aren't living together. But you'd have to basically be married or have this de facto uh, living agreement or the de facto partnership agreement to file a joint tax return.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we can try and track down some way to get a cohabitation, but the like precise moment of transition of cohabitation, it's much harder to measure. Unlike childbirth, where it's very easy to measure because we have the birth
Yeah, right.
certificates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, I think these are points that are important. So thank you very much. Please keep shouting out.
No.
All right, so I think one question here is this, and this was sort of raised earlier, is this a preference-based or a constraint-based change? I mean, the sharp timing of results, and particularly the pre-birth changes, it points to this potentially being something which is preference or behavioral based. Like it's not clearly the fact that say I don't know in period -2 your increases or period -1 you have the increase in economic demands and so or even necessarily time demands, especially for fathers. So it's not clear that this could be explained by a constraint-based thing. We can also, and I'll show you this shortly, we can look at longer time periods when we might think that some of the incapacitation effects diminish. So like when the child becomes school-aged, some of the time constraints start to decline. Um, and also a potentially more direct test of preference-based change versus constraint-based change, right? So like, is this just that you have much less time? Let's consider first versus second birth. You become a parent once in your life, like you move from non-parent to parenthood only once, but you can have children multiple times. So we might think if this is people become parents and they really say, I want to turn my life around, the sort of preference-based argument, this is isolated the first time, whereas the second time, you've had another sort of a time and an economic shock, but you're still a parent. So considering how things vary at the first versus second birth lets us in some sense sort of shut off the preference-based channel in the second birth. So I think first thing is if we look over an extended period, so here we're following people up to the age of 8, we don't see any like clear changes when kids reach school age, right? So here they're reaching school age, and we see things getting much noisier because we sort of run out of data at these very very late stages. We can only use early years to get that, but we don't see any like sort of clear evolution where things turn around. For dads in particular, you sort of see that as they get further away from their birth, things get even better. This, in some sense, is because the domestic violence issues become less extreme. I guess for convictions, you sort of see that things are generally quite flat. The other relevant point, so this is looking at first birth, where we see this quite permanent change, and I agree that we can look at people who only have one birth and sort of avoid the concern that this is being driven by second births. Whereas for second births, things look somewhat different, right? We sort of see this difference if we toggle between them. That in second birth, it's much more of a temporary change, particularly looking at things like convictions. I think convictions is quite a clean outcome because we know these are all serious crimes. Oops. In first birth, we see a permanent decline in convictions, whereas in second births, you see that yes, there's some incapacitation, but by the time the child, so this is these are all crimes that are being committed after the person's already committed their first birth, presumably. You see the sort of increase in constraints. You see people are incapacitated, but then by the time the child's here around 2 years old, you see things are more or less back to business as usual. For fathers, it's even more clear that there's this very temporary sort of decline, at least in convictions.
Sorry, for the first birth, go one back or two back. I would love to re-see these done with domestic violence just removed, like excluded, because this increase that we're seeing for the fathers, I'd love to see domestic violence gone and then see what's going on with the rest of the crime.
Yeah, we can do that. I agree. That's a good point. Yeah, remove DV. Actually, I was thinking that a similar thing. Remove DV for that. Yeah.
Because I wonder if this is a story, like I feel like this paper could become a story about domestic violence on its own versus crime.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you look at this, like there's clearly two things. There's two things happening, right? I agree.
So sorry, I came late in. The effect, is that proportional or absolute?
That's absolute.
So you can add it up. You can say the domestic crime has increased more than any other type of crime has decreased. So the total.
Yeah, exactly. So this is all showing crimes per 1,000. Right. So I think the point is like there are some crimes here like homicide where this is just like it looks like a 0.
Yeah.
Because homicides are very infrequent. We do have proportional effects, and you just see things like get quite, is that the right one? I mean, these are just yeah, I mean, so like for mothers you see this quite clear. I mean, some of this is like that you have small denominators and things sort of fall apart a little bit when you zoom out. But like you see the sort of quite clear declines across instrumental crimes. Yeah, so all of this is absolute crime rates.
Mm.
And I think when you get to these like quite uncommon crimes, homicide, you have such a small denominator that proportional declines.
But if you were to add up all types, instrumental and expressive, then you get
this.
So it's a net positive.
Or it's a net decline, but for fathers you see like a net positive because of the domestic violence increase.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a few more minutes, I think. So I mean, there's various things that we consider. I think that like the broad thing is, do we see declines everywhere? Yeah, we see declines across the criminal justice system. So like when they first make contact, when they're in likelihood of being found guilty, etc. We see declines across virtually all crime types, with the exception of domestic violence. We don't, and we sort of thought we might see some evidence of within family specialization, particularly within say families where there's a lot of crime. Like, I don't know, one, say the father specializes in crime, the mother moves out of crime because the cost of having two parents sent to jail is very high. We don't see much evidence of that. We just see sort of crimes decline even in these like these two crime families. We see quite similar declines in crime. We thought potentially we might see transitions to less likely crime types. So say here for the outcome of theft, we might expect that if we look at people who are committing theft before they had a kid, what they do is, instead of committing, say, violent theft, they start to commit non-violent theft, right? So like they start to just do, I don't know, robbing supermarkets and things where they're not going to have such a high criminal sanction. And what we see if we focus on these is, so here we're conditioning on the person has committed that crime type before pregnancy. So we see this big decline, conditioning on having committed theft. You clearly commit less theft, but we don't see that there's like a corresponding increase in non-violent theft. And when we look at that across classes, basically all we see is people stop committing the type of crime they commit, and other types of crimes are flat. So there's no obvious sort of like transition across crime types. The only sort of exception is you see increase in domestic violence also in when we condition on having committed other types of crimes. There's no real evidence to suggest that people are moving into more less serious types of crimes. So I've got like 8 minutes, right, Viola? Okay. I mean, there's a second part of the paper. I might just sort of talk through the idea briefly because I'm aware that we're running close to time. But these sort of our effects suggest that becoming a parent has a big effect on crime rates. And actually, if you compare the effects of parenthood to the most successful interventions that try and reduce crime, there's well-known interventions like the Becoming a Man program in the United States. Typically, you see the effects of these quite intensive programs are of a similar order of magnitude of fertility. So this suggests that fertility or becoming a parent, clearly not a crime prevention policy, but has large effects. And the sort of concern in a situation, and here I'm just going to show you how fertility rates have changed in Chile over the last decade. Fertility's really fallen to the floor. Like, it's gone from what I said, around 2 births per woman to around 1.04 births per woman. So you're seeing all these births, which used to be concentrated among the ages when people were in their key criminal behavior, are going away, and they're moving also to later in life. So one thing we want to do in the paper is we want to ask what the large shifts in fertility in this particular setting imply for crime rates. And we do it in 2 ways. The first thing is we can just do sort of some simple comparative statics. So what would have happened to crime rates had fertility remained the same? And then secondly, where we try and sort of causally estimate the impact of fertility declines on crime, because the thought is if fertility is falling, crime should be increasing, given the fertility sort of puts this brake on crime. I think the key thing, I mean, this is just some sort of let me just show here. The key thing is, if you just take the decline in fertility over the last period, we would expect that crime should have increased by 12.7% among women. Of course, many other things are changing, and the deeper point here is that the effects of becoming a parent are really largest when you become a parent early in your life. So here what we're showing is the same estimates we showed you previously, but how does crime decline for teenagers, for 20 to 24-year-olds, for 25 to 29-year-olds, and for older people? And what you really see, this is just, in some sense, this is like showing our event study. So this is T-2, the time when you give birth, and the years after birth. So what we see is that these effects are huge for teenagers. And then by the time you're 25, 30, 35, the effect of becoming a parent on crime is very low. I mean, you've already sort of become more tranquil. You've selected out of crime. And so really, it's these teen births that are really key. But if you think about the changes of fertility we've seen over the last years, it's in this context, it's really been that teen births are going away. So we might think this compositional change is very important. Viola, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question but these are kind of absolute change, right? So isn't it also the crime rate maybe among these
That's
teens?
true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, this is if we look in. Oh, that looks really bad. Sorry, but even also in relative terms. So this is you see that the effects are much larger for teenagers. So here we're saying like nearly 100% decline among teens and smaller effects among older people. But I agree. This is obviously this is contaminated by higher rates in general. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we do this sort of like compositional argument, and we see that that actually maybe in the interest of time, I won't go through it too much, but the fact that these teen births in particular are going away has a big impact on just on like back of the envelope calculation of crime. And then what we try and do, and this is something we're still working on now, is look at a causal effect of this. So we have this like rollout of these local health centers, these things called espacios amigables, which are well known. They've had this sort of well documented effect on fertility. They essentially just give out contraceptives to teenagers, and they've rolled out from 2010 onwards. And so what we then do is we look at the effect of these things. So this is estimating the effect of these local healthcare centers on teen births, and we see they have this decline when these local health centers arrive to municipalities. We see a decline in fertility, and we potentially also see. I mean, this is a bit noisy because now we're using municipal crime rates, but we see a sort of a corresponding increase in an event study style framework in crime rates. All right. In the interest of time, I might conclude. So in this paper, we show that entry to parenthood fundamentally reshapes criminal behavior. As far as we know, this is the first national level study working with millions of births, tens of millions of interactions with the criminal justice system. Clearly, the results point to parenthood reflecting a critical turning point for both mothers and fathers. Obviously, there's nuance to the story. I mean, there's a certain change in the type of crimes people commit. We don't find evidence that suggests that there's sort of specialization, that within families some people are moving into crime, others aren't. And we also see that these effects of parenthood are particularly transformative among young parents. We argue the implications of this are quite important in an age of fertility decline. The effect of parenthood is in some sense like as large as the most successful anti-crime programs that exist. And so somewhat in some sense this suggests that given these fertility declines and given how important fertility is as a turning point, there needs to be some sort of complementary interventions targeted at these people who used to become parents and are now in some sense drifting and at risk for continuing criminal behavior. Thank you very much. I think I've nearly run out of time. Close.
I just have one quick question, if I may ask, because I have to go teach now.
Of course.
When I look at all the crimes you reported, what happens if there's something like kidnappings or extortion? Where are they picked up? I mean, are they anywhere in your data?
Yeah, that's in there. There's like a type of crime. I mean, they're very uncommon, but they're in there. There's like a type of crime called like liberty privacy. This is like this is the crime. We can look at kidnappings, but there's not very many.
Oh, okay. So I mean, because most of the Latin American countries, when they talk about it, they say these are like. Now, I'm not saying Chile is. I understand relatively much safer country, but still, I thought that maybe okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Damian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have
take care.
Bye. Bye. We have time for one last question by Klaus. I see that you raise your hand.
Yes, thanks. Very nice talk. I followed intensively. Now, the raw story at the end is that parenthood somehow is strengthening social responsibility. Something
Yeah.
that's how I would summarize that. Now, that's good, and that's what we want to see in principle. Of course, if fertility goes down, then the opposite happens. Now, could it also be that in the long run, it's reverse? I mean, it's social responsibility which is falling down, which is driving down fertility and so on. Isn't the dynamic starting somewhere else?
I mean, I think that's the big question, right? Like, I think the broader question is how do we or this like these serious concerns with fertility decline, what's actually causing fertility decline? And actually, if you look at like sort of at least in this context where fertility has declined very quickly. If you look at all the sort of the things that explain fertility decline, there's like this dark matter. Like it's like, well, look at contraceptives, that's explained like 15% of the decline. But there's a lot of reasons why we don't know why this fertility is sort of fallen off a cliff. And I think I mean maybe this is it. Maybe there's like some decline in some change in the way young people are interacting with the world. So I mean, yeah, this could be this could be the case that there's some bigger picture change in youth.
But
Yeah,
I have no proof for this, of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
hard to
it's a thought. Okay.
but it's
Yeah.
an interesting question.
Thanks.
Thank you
yeah.
very
So
much.
since it's 3 o'clock, I think we have, at least in the Netherlands, always in your time zone. I think we have to stop now. But I would like to thank Damian a lot for this very interesting presentation, and all of you for attending. Thank you so much.
Thanks all for coming.
Thank you. Bye.